Hello again, Stroke. Today I'm bringing you another build video, and this one is another rework, version 3.0 of my previous build that was named Azyre Phantom. So, like in version 2.0, in 3.0 I will be bringing you two ways to play the build. One of them would be by using a more standard setup where you're using the first god skill tree and you're focusing more on flat damage and HP from the blessings and trying to get some damage and armor piercing and so on. And then the other option would be me experimenting and checking how much stronger the counter spell plus counter attack combo setup has gotten after the changes. And in both versions the results were nice. Last time when I did that in 2.0 the counter attack wasn't as good, but now the counter attack is a bit better, although keep in mind that right now the footage you're seeing is the counter spell setup, but I didn't have as much counter attack as I wanted, because some of my items were whacking gear rows and some of my items were still legacy items from before the Forges update, before they boosted the counter attack you can get from items. So if you started playing after the Forges update, you should be able to get much better results than me. Of course, also the weapons and offhand and rings and amulets really matter, and gauntlets when it comes to the damage. But I was happy with the results that I was seeing. I tried to make the non-counter spell damage more focused on less survivability and more damage, whereas the counter spell damage I tried to make it a bit more tanky with the arcane manifestation superior, as you can see, that I'm using. It's pretty solid, pretty nice. Hope you like one of the two setups or maybe even both of them. And now let's show you some information about the skills for the first and then the second setup. So here is what I've selected for the skills and passives, for the active and passive skills for the non-counterattack setup. For the more standard setup, which is kind of closer to what I was using in the 2.0 version of this build. For that setup we've got Phantom Blade Heroic that comes from the Blade of Azyre sword, then Breath of Fire. This one is just a filler, you can use whatever you want. You can use a Tornado, you can use Phoenix Bulwark, Etheric Ray, anything that you think you want to put here. Then Etheric Storm Mastered, pretty nice to boost our damage and do some damage. Binding White for some energy and health regeneration. You don't need energy, but you could benefit from the health regen and from the repelling and slowing. Step Between Worlds Superior, you can change it for Step Between Worlds, the basic one, if you want to, for example, upgrade Etheric Vortex. And this brings us to Etheric Vortex Superior for damage reduction. And of course movement speed and cooldown time, but if you want to do more damage you can get this one for another 30%, and as I said, you can downgrade Step Between Worlds to get the points needed for this. Then we've got the second part of the bread and butter. This is the bread, this is the butter, or this is the bread, this is the butter, whatever you want to call it. This one, Arcane Binding Heroic, which comes from the Dragontamer set. This is amazing and strongly recommend not playing without it, because it's your heroic skill. And then Hero of the Desert gives us a little bit of damage, reduction, HP, crit damage, movement speed. I really love this skill for almost all of my builds. Arcane Secrets Mastered, burning enemies take more magical damage, and we are kind of burning the enemies with different things. Like this one can burn the enemies, and with this one we can also burn the enemies. And if you decide to go the route where you're using Etheric Vortex Master, this one should also be burning the enemies, if I'm not mistaken. Maybe not, maybe just the heroic version burns enemies. This one unfortunately doesn't seem to do so. So you might want to consider some other choices. Like for example, Breath of Fire does burn, but if you don't like it, you can try using Phoenix Bulwark. Or you can try downgrading Step Between Worlds and then use the Tornado, but it doesn't burn, it just does fire damage. So again, I think the way I've set it is nice, but if you want, you can just rearrange some things. What else have we got? Fortress of Willpower, that's just some damage reduction, and Quaish Mastery, even more magical damage to stack with this one. So Duelist Chain Reaction is amazing. It's up to 4 stacks of 100 crit damage, so 400 crit damage, and we can keep it up easily. This is a skill with cooldown, this is a skill with cooldown, and this is a skill with cooldown. So rotating those in the right order and just spamming those would allow us to keep this at 400% crit damage. Now I will quickly switch over to the other setup, the one with the counter attack, and then show you what I've done on it. So here are the skills for the counter spell, counter attack combo setup. As you can see on this side, nothing much changed other than using Arcane Manifestation instead of Etheric Storm. And this is the superior version with the damage reduction for the duration. So 36-second cooldown is what I've got right now with my gear, and 15-second duration, so almost half of the time this would be up. There's of course a lot of wiggle room with the build. First, this can be replaced again for Phoenix Bulwark or Etheric Ray or a Tornado or Etheric Orb, whatever you like, some sort of energy cost skill over there, up to you. This one I suggest not changing. This one I suggest not changing. You're using here Phantom Blade Heroic, which is the bread and butter, together with Arcane Binding Heroic. Etheric Vortex Superior you could change, and Step Between Worlds you could change for a different version. So if you want just the teleport without the magical damage, get the basic one, then upgrade this one if you don't want that damage reduction. If you want more damage, to this one. That's one of my suggestions for an upgrade. Another thing that you can change, first of all, Quaish Mastery. Mastered, you really don't need that one on Mastered. In fact, my suggestion is just go for this one like on the other build. But for the build I've decided to take this one in case you want it, in case you want to be slowing the enemies. Now another thing that can be changed is I'm using padded armor. If you don't really need all that damage reduction, I'd suggest get this for extra 20% more damage. It increases the energy cost, which you really don't care. You're using mostly energy generation skill to do damage, so this one is not gonna bother you. You also get some constant health regeneration when you are using when you're consuming energy. And I think the way this works is the more energy you're consuming, the more that health regeneration goes. So with higher energy cost, this should increase. Let's check if it did. It doesn't increase in paper, but I've tested it before, not after this patch, but on the previous patches, and that's how it used to work. The more energy you consume, the more you heal. So energy cost does help that healing. So this is something you could consider. Another thing you could consider is equilibrium. Equilibrium to be able to maybe do something like lowering the cooldowns of this and this, especially this one, while consuming energy with that one, and also getting energy while using skills with cooldown. It's not bad to consider that one. Apart from that, the other things are not gonna give you that much, because you're not gonna be focusing on fire, you're focusing on magical with this. And this one's not bad, but only if you really need that crit chance. Now, what else is there for us? There's those free skills, and then there's one thing I wanna mention, both for this build and for the other build. Veteran's Chain Reaction can give some interesting stuff to Breath of Fire or other skills with energy cost, but this build is not around it, so I would avoid it, I guess. Something that you can consider is the potion that gives you 50% counter attack damage, though. This is for 6 seconds after using the potion. So you can use the potion as a buff to get that extra counter attack, and that should give you a few more percent, maybe like 15-20% more damage over there. I can't check it right now because I need to take damage and I can't take damage. But I think that's kind of it for the options you've got. Here it is a little bit of info for the legendary ranks I used. I was using legendary reinforcement, legendary endurance and legendary crushing. Basically you want 100 power. If you have to pick only one thing, if you're a new player, I suggest legendary reinforcement because you have 3 skills with cooldown. You would be using those all the time to proc duelist chain reaction, and that would help you get up to 50% damage and 20% damage reduction. It applies to you, not to the enemies. Second on the priority list, after you've gotten this one to like 30% chance, 100% power, when you have enough points to get this to 100% chance and like 100% power, 30% chance, I would suggest investing into legendary endurance. And then for example, when this is 30% chance, which would be 60 points in chance and 100 points in power, and this is 60 points in chance and 100 points in power, and you have some spare points, then you can kind of invest into legendary crushing. Once you have all of those at 30% chance and 100 power, I would suggest get this to 40% chance, then get this to 35% chance, then get this to 35% chance, then get this to 45 chance, get this to 40, get this to 40, then eventually get all of those to 45, then start giving slowly and steadily bumping those up until you have like 100 chance. Then eventually at one point you would go back to 30% or 35% chance on all 3 of those and invest into legendary punishment with 100 power and 30% chance, which would take you a lot of time to get. So for now you might want to stick to 1, 2 or 3 of those. If you don't want that much damage reduction, get rid of crushing and get punishment. Why I don't think crushing is better than endurance? Crushing only applies on the enemy, and if you kill an enemy, this goes away and you have to hit another enemy to apply it to them. But with legendary endurance, you have to hit an enemy but apply a buff to yourself for a few seconds. So this gets applied to you, and even if you kill that enemy you've been hitting and an enemy that you've never hit hits you, you're still gonna benefit from that damage reduction. So this works the same way as crushing. You have to hit an enemy to make him take more damage. So it's good for bosses though, it's good for bosses. And avoid legendary rage because it's broken and it doesn't trigger. At least I've tested it many times and it just still doesn't seem to trigger. So that's kind of it. Hope it works well for you, and let's move on to the next part. I hope it's clear now. Let's move on to the God skills section. Here is the God skill tree for the first setup, the more standard setup that is not using counter-spell, and I tried to not use the second God skill tree in case there is someone out there who is playing on a version that does not own the God skills pack, the God skills DLC. So this build would be perfect for those of you who are like that. First of all, we're going all the way here for Etheric Storm Mastered, and on the way we are grabbing Fortress of Willpower Superior. Then I decided to grab here Arcane Secrets Mastered. And here comes the final tidbits of customization of the build. After this point, everything is up to you how you want to customize it. I decided to max out armor piercing, damage and bonus damage to champions. So what I do here is ignore this 5% damage over time, but there's 3% damage, then another 5% damage and 10 armor piercing. Then another 5 armor piercing, 3 damage and 8 damage to champions. Then there's 3 damage, 8 damage to champions, 3 HP and 3 damage. Those are the final 2 points. I was wondering where to put them, and I realized I can't take 2 times damage. So it would have been either damage over time damage, HP damage, or HP. I decided to just spend them here. because there is no other way to get 2 times just a single point invested into damage. It's pretty decent though. I think it's very nice because look at that 25% armor piercing, 41 flat damage. Yeah, the crit damage doesn't seem much, but I'm still seeing high crits, close to like 50 million even at times, and it's amazing. I really love it, especially that bonus damage to champions and armor piercing would be crucial versus bosses and champion fights. So now that I've explained this, let's move on to the second setup, where I'm gonna talk about the counter spell, counter attack damage combo. And here are the god skills for the counter spell setup. Needless to say, you're taking counter spell mastered. Then all the way here you're grabbing this 50% counter attack damage, and all the way on it you're adding a total of 134 counter attack damage. Pretty much a wall of counter attack damage. Then there's one final point which you can spend on whatever you want. If you want damage, grab damage. If you want HP, grab HP. I just spent it here for damage. I don't think there's anything else other than damage and HP we can get, so whatever you want, do it. If you don't have that much HP in your gear, grab it. If you don't think you need the HP, just get the damage, I guess. And that's pretty much it. It's pretty straightforward. There's not much to talk about in regards to alternatives for this one. So hope you enjoy it, and we can now move on to the segment where we talk about the items that I suggest and the stat rolls on those. And here we are talking about the items and what stats I would suggest taking. First of all, you want the Dragontamer set, then you want a Blade of Azyre, a Relentless Sentinel, Phase Shift Amulet, and for the rings, I think it really doesn't matter which ones you pick. Pick the ones you like for your playstyle, something that has good rolls on it. And I'm gonna talk about the good rolls in a moment. First, what rolls do you want on the helmet? Well, that depends whether you're using counter spell or not. This is the item for counter spell, so it has cooldown reduction, HP and counter attack damage as a priority. If you're not using counter spell on each item, ignore the counter attack damage, you don't need it unless using counter spell. But prioritize getting cooldown reduction because you can only get it on helmets, rings and amulets and weapons, not on chest, leg boots and gloves. So this one, good amount of HP and preferably good amount of armor would be nice. Anything else is bonus, like health regeneration, resistant to damage over time to every single piece of equipment is like a bonus when it comes to the armors. Chest and legs, I would say the same rules apply to chest and leg when we are talking about them. I would say prioritize high HP, high armor, and if using counter spell damage, prioritize counter attack damage stats on it. You can get up to 2500 on a single piece, which is pretty high. So for those, that's the suggested stuff. Again, resistance, regeneration and things like that are just a bonus. Now, for the boots, I would say prioritize HP. And if you're using counter attack damage, try to get that as a second priority, and then your third priority should be probably some movement speed if you want it. Although with this build we are moving pretty fast due to Step Between Worlds being on a kind of short-ish cooldown, and this can also help with the cooldown and the movement speed. So even if you don't get movement speed boots, don't worry about it. Then next you want armor, and after that just whatever you can get. And now let's talk about the blade a bit. For the blade, I would suggest prioritize if you can cool down flat damage HP. If you're using counter attack damage, after those three things, try to get counter attack damage. If you're not, then try to get armor piercing or crit damage. And then next, ignore damage over time. For example, let's show you some more swords so I can show you what you could ignore. You could ignore damage over time, you could ignore cost reduction, you could ignore energy. Health drain is nice though. If you can get health drain, it would be nice. So on this blade here, since I already have a lot of armor piercing in one of the setups, I probably would prefer to replace it. Alternatively, I could replace the crit damage for health drain, but right now, even without that health drain, I seem to be doing fine. So I guess it's up to you. It's up to you whether you want health drain, whether you want armor piercing, whether you want crit damage more. Some of you might even prefer to sacrifice the cooldown reduction. I strongly suggest not ignoring the flat damage and HP though. Those two should be my top priority. The cooldown maybe is my second, together with the counter attack if using it. So the same rules apply to Relentless Sentinel, but you won't crit chance, by the way, on it. And this one cannot give you crit chance. As a sword you cannot get crit chance, but on a staff you can get crit chance. So on the Sentinel you're not prioritizing crit damage, but crit chance and flat damage top priority. HP priority number 2 if you can get it. As you can see, I couldn't, so I don't have it. And then together with the HP, I would say on the same priority you might want to put the counter attack if you're using the couter-spell build. If not, then on the third priority after the HP you would want to put the crit damage and armor piercing, equally important. Oh, I forgot about the cooldown reduction. This doesn't give as much cooldown reduction as this one, and since this build doesn't really need that much, you might sacrifice it again, but I would put it around the same priority for myself as HP, like second priority maybe, or first priority even, depending. Then wood quality you don't need, energy you don't need, cost reduction you don't need, health drain would be nice. Ideally on this stuff here I would prefer instead of wood quality HP, and then I would be pretty happy with the results even without HP drain. This brings us to the phase shift amulet, and for the amulet and rings I would say the exact same rules apply for all three of them. So you want crit chance, super important to have crit chance. This build doesn't need cooldown reduction, so you might want to prioritize crit chance over cooldown, but if you can get both of them. If you can get crit chance and cooldown, so you can spam this as much as you can, and so you can just use those as soon as possible to be able to proc that dual exchange reaction. Even right now I can proc the dual exchange reaction with 6 seconds, 4 seconds and 9 seconds on those, but this one is 36. Ideally I would like to see that under 30-second cooldown, so I can kind of make sure that we get the duration being kind of half of it, maybe more than half of its cooldown. So you want crit chance, you want cooldown reduction, you want flat damage, you want HP. Those 4 stats I would put as a high priority. Counter-attack damage as stat number 5 would be amazing if you're using the counter-attack setup. If you're not using it, then armor piercing or crit damage or even armor would be nice. Actually the crit damage is pretty low, just 20 something%, so you might wanna remove that from the third priority or the second priority and just put it a little bit lower than armor and armor piercing. Even health drain is nice and nicer than a little bit of crit damage. So I'm not sure whether we talked about the bracer. So as I said, the same thing I said for the amulet applies to the rings, and it needs to be phase shift amulet. I strongly suggest taking it, whereas for the rings you can take anything you want. But let's quickly go back to the bracer. The bracer is the only piece of equipment where you can get flat damage and crit damage. Crit damage is not that important because you can get like 40-ish, and if you have to pick between crit damage and flat damage, of course 3000 for the red and 6000 plus for the green. Flat damage is gonna do you much better than a little bit of crit damage. So prioritize number 1 flat damage and HP, and then number 2, if using counter-attack damage, try to get it. Try to get like 1300 plus counter-attack damage, and then some extra armor wouldn't hurt. And then if you can get some health drain or whatever, like health regeneration and any of those other stats like resistance to damage over time, it's gonna be nice, but that's not like at the top of the list. Now for the rings that I'm using, you can see I'm using Ring of Hotek for extra healing, and that's only because this one gives me good HP, a little bit of counter attack damage. This is a legacy ring, so it only gives me 350. A new ring after the Forges update, and with that Tower of Chaos update can give you 900, even 1000 counter attack damage. So definitely it can be stronger if used right. Another thing that you might experiment with, maybe a good Ring of Resonance, would be stunning the enemies with all those three. And Ring of Dexterity is amazing because that's gonna give you 100% more damage for Phantom Blade Heroic. So if you get a very nice good rolled Phantom Blade with crit chance, flat damage, counter attack damage, maybe a little bit of health drain, maybe a little bit of a cooldown reduction or HP, it would be amazing. You have to decide. I think Old Ring of Dexterity is my top choice pick of a ring to suggest using. You just need good rolls on it. Crystalline Ring is nice to give you extra health and healing, and I'm only using it because I'm using Hotek to boost Hotek and just to get that extra healing from other sources. But other things to mention, Ring of Denial, you can sacrifice damage for damage reduction and HP. You can use Ring of Cain if you want extra damage, but you have to pick Bloodlust Orbs. I don't think we need Radiance, I don't think Dragon Ring is really needed, but if you need survivability, get Dragon Ring. This one is interesting because damage taken is reduced, but it reduces energy. Has no effect if energy is empty. And since this build really doesn't need energy, this is 50% damage reduction, as long as you have energy. So if you find Ring of the Veil with good rolls, that's gonna be my top 2 ring suggestion. So ideally you would be using Ring of Dexterity and Ring of the Veil, and that would open up things to removing padded armor, and maybe even removing things like this one, when using the other build, the Fortress of Willpower. Definitely some things that can be done with that ring. What else is worth mentioning? I guess we mentioned the most important rings that are worth considering. This one, avoid it, you don't need it, not for this build. And avoid old ring of not dexterity, but this one here on the invasions. Old ring of shadow, avoid it, you don't want that dodge chance, it's only 10%, and even if you stack 2 it's not gonna work. And by the way, this is where you get the duelist chain reaction in the invasions from this node, and this is where you get the ring of dexterity from this node, and this is where you get the ring of resonance for this node. And when collecting rings, go to the lowest ranks that has not been collected. So for example, if I were to finish this node, I would go back to rank 20 and then collect, then go to rank 21 and collect, and so on, going up the ranks collecting the ring. Because if I collect the ring on rank 28, that means rank 20, 21 and all the way to 27 would already be collected, but not in my inventory, which is kind of a bug, or maybe they intentionally made it like that to force people to go back. Just be careful when collecting rings to not fuck yourself over and lose rewards. And I think that pretty much is it. One more thing that we might talk about would be the blessings. So when using counter attack stuff, you would be using something like this: green, blue, green, green, blue, green. That's on both sides with links with the god token. When you're using the damage setup, there's 3 versions. This is version 1, 3,600 damage, 8,000 HP. Then this is version 2, more balanced, 4,000 damage, 6,000 HP. And then this is the more glass cannon-ish version, which is the 4,400 damage and 4,000 HP. So basically each each extra green green fragment you add gives you extra 2000 HP, and removing that red one reduces by the flat damage by 420. So the difference is between the 4000 and the 8000, you can see it's 4000 HP, and the difference between the 4480 damage and the lower one, you can see it's 2 times 420 damage. And that's pretty much it. Decide which set you wanna use, but when using the counter-attack damage setup, I really suggest going for counter-attack damage on only 4 pieces of equipment. I tested it, and as soon as I blessed a fifth piece of equipment with counter-attack damage, and losing that damage, flat damage from it, I lost damage over here. So my damage over here got reduced a bit, and this is why I suggest sticking to only 4 pieces of equipment with counter-attack damage blessings for the counter-spell setup. That was kind of a long segment, so let's now move on to the next one, where I'm gonna show you a little bit of me playing the build and showing you how I combo certain things and why. So here I wanted to share with you a little bit of extra gameplay footage of me playing the build. You can see that at the top is counter spell damage, at the bottom corner you would see Arcane Secrets. Arcane Secrets would be getting the higher numbers, just because I built it that way, and because my gear in the counter spell again was missing some counter attack base counterattack from item rolls, which could probably give me a few percent, maybe get me up to 90% bonus damage instead of 83% from the skill. It's not gonna be that big of a difference, but again, I'm using different passives. I'm focusing more on survivability. I'm using padded armor, which is crucial extra survivability, but instead of padded armor I could have taken something like Quake Shield for that extra damage. So let me know which one you like, by the way, if you end up testing both of them, if you have enough blessings to test both of them. I'm assuming that most people would go for the Arcane Secrets setup. First of all, it doesn't require getting items with counter attack damage, which might be difficult to get. Then second of all, it might be easier, and third, people may not even have the new God Skills 3, that's why I tried to make that one to just use the first God Skill 3 instead of the DLC one. Overall, either setup is good enough for Chaos 9 and probably even for Chaos 10, especially if you're in a team. So which one is better, I'll just leave it up to you to decide. I guess it just matters how you wanna play, whether you wanna afford a little bit more survivability, and either setup can be modified for more survivability and less damage. I could use padded armor on my Arcane Secrets the same way I could use damage passives on the other one. So let's talk about how to play the build. Basically, keep teleporting to move around and stop when there's an elite or a big pack of mobs. If your teleport is in cooldown, use the dome and move along with it by moving the dome with your archetype ability, which on PC is holding spacebar. It would make your cooldowns faster while you're inside the dome, while you're moving, and it would give you movement speed. Then once you're attacking, just use the Phantom Blade, slash some enemies. If you need to move away from danger, move. If you see an enemy charging an attack that you think you may not be able to handle, soaking up the damage off. And try to make sure that the enemies are right next to you and you're inside the dome, and that you're using the storm to get yourself buffed up when there's elites and champions. You may not use the storm when there's just a bunch of trash mobs, if you're expecting to need it in a few seconds for an elite, but it definitely helps with that extra damage buff from Etheric Storm. And if you're using the other setup, the counter-spell setup, instead of Etheric Storm, try to use Arcane Manifestation just to get that extra damage to enemies around you from those projectiles, and to also get that damage reduction for yourself, for extra tankiness. Besides that, Binding White is always there to help you, and try to stay static so we can proc the Relentless Sentinel if you can. You can hold shift and attack to make sure that you're attacking. Most enemies are melee and they will be coming next to you. You can just teleport to the ranged enemies and start swashing away until the melee ones arrive. So you can proc a Relentless Sentinel, you can use Binding White in the same place, you can use the Dome, the Storm or the Manifestation and just stack all the buffs and goodies. And apart from that, just kill stuff, avoid taking big hits or standing in damage over time fields, and that's pretty much it. If you've enjoyed this video and want to be notified for when I upload more content like this for this game or other wooters of the hack and slash or shooter wooter variety, you could subscribe to my channel to get those content updates, and you can get notified by clicking on the bell button as well. So hope you enjoyed it, hope everything was clear. If something wasn't, share your comments, questions, etc. in the section below. Keep it cool, folks. Thank you for watching, and until next time, goodbye.